Hi, I'm David Korn.
And I'm Jim Pinkerton.
Together?
We're bloggingheads.tv, back again for more punishment. Anyway,
our punishment or their punishment? You've been a naughty boy. You must watch Pinkerton and Korn.
But I haven't seen you in a long time. One thing or another in the summer has.
I know it's like a reunion. It's like the Beatles getting back together, the Beach Boys, the Monkees, the Archies.
Oh, we can drink. In any case, so
not much has happened since the last book, has it? I've missed you, Jim. I haven't been able to use you as a sounding board for Sarah Palin.
Financial crisis.
Barack Obama's not wearing a tie. What does this mean in Middle America? How does it demonstrate once again that the elites are out of touch?
Okay. Where to begin?
Well, let's begin with the substance and then move to the politics. They do blend together this week.
Okay.
And that is the bailout, the Paulson package.
Right.
I keep wanting to say Pat Paulson. That dates me.
That dates you. Yeah.
Younger viewers, you can Google it if you really...
Google Wikipedia. Yeah, that's the answers all questions from your elders.
Maybe YouTube will help you out on that. Pat Paulson. But anyway, the Secretary of Treasury is really named Hank Paulson, and he's looking for about $700 billion in pocket change that he can just sort of go out and dispense on his own little fire sale. And one provision of the bill, of course, says that his final decisions are unrevocable. So it really is giving him a lot of power to go out there and inject cash into the whole credit system by buying paper that at this point in time isn't worth a lot, but which the Feds hope will go up in value if they hold on to it long enough. So it seems to me the populists on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, are not swallowing this thing too easily at this point in time.
I agree. I think this is a terrible bill. I wouldn't vote for it in a million years. I think, I'll let you go first, and I'll tell you why I think it's a bad idea. But I suspect you agree with me.
I think it's a bad bill because, again, there's very little accountability. There's not a lot of transparency at the top. It's a lot of money. It's all in one big batch of funds rather than sort of, have payments or amounts that are smaller.
Right. Senator Schumer on the hearings today, as we're talking on Tuesday, said exactly that. He said, "Why can't you settle for $150 billion?"
Yeah, I know.
And Paulson, of course, had no answer other than just give me the money. Yeah. They really don't want to be bothered by anybody else. But these are moments when you appreciate the Congress. The Congress for once doing what it's supposed to do, which is advise and consent and deliberate and so on and so on and so on. What they didn't do so spectacularly on things like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or the Iraq War resolution. It'd be nice to see them do this now.
Well, yes, and I think the amount of money. I think the fact that it comes after a series of promises. Well, if we take care of Bear Stearns, we don't have to worry about much. If you give us the authority to buy a portion of Freddie Mac, we won't have to use it. Actually, we do. Well, we're not going to bail on anybody else. Sorry, Lehman Brothers. Oh, but AIG, we like you. And then after all that, and now we need $700 billion. So I think the public is a little bewildered by what's going on here. And why is it if you, Jim Pinkerton, make a boneheaded move and sink all your money into swampland in Florida, and then it goes belly up, no one comes and says, here, we'll help you out so you can stay in your house. But yet if you do this as big players in Wall Street using swaps and derivatives that nobody understands, that were only designed not to help anyone really achieve more capital formation, but really as a way to package and sell things from one trader to the other and pass along risks so that you're not left holding the bag. It's like a game of musical chairs. Why is it when you miscalculate, when you screw up, when you ride the market, the free market theories, and then crash, that the federal government has to come along and say, well, we're going to take this off your hands? And I think a lot of people are sort of wondering, and at the hearings that you referenced earlier, there was a lot of talk, what they call it the too big to fail issue. And Ben Bernanke said, yes, that is a problem that we have to find a methodology to deal with. And it's as if we're being held hostage. The whole economy is being held hostage by a lot of these private equity firms, investment banks, bad lenders, and they say, hey, if you let us go down, we'll just pull the rest of the economy with us. So you got to help us.
No, if you let us lose money, we'll take the rest of the economy with us. I'm not convinced that Goldman Sachs would go bankrupt if it did. And frankly, if it did, so what? Look, I mean, there's an old Czech proverb, the big thieves hang the little thieves, and then the big thieves, of course, are still left to, create empires and countries and kingdoms and so on. And I think the same thing applies on this. The big con artists legalize themselves and get good with the government somehow. And the little con artists just hopefully wind up in jail. They also should wind up in jail.
I think it was Woody Guthrie who said some will rob you with a six-shooter, and others with a knife. Well, and others with a pen. So yeah.
I mean, these are all true. I mean, every conspiratorial, populist Marxist theory of how the economy works is being vindicated right in front of us. And I tell you, I do think that that something has gone wrong, and I would put it very much on the too big to fail variable. And my response is, if an institution is too big to fail, then it shouldn't be allowed to exist. I think it was a horrible mistake to repeal Glass-Steagall, the law that separated investment banking from banking.
Yeah, that was in 1989.
It was completely bipartisan.
It was cooked.
Senator Phil Gramm, Republican of Texas, working closely with Treasury Secretary Larry Summers and ex-Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin. It was the ultimate example of sort of the Tom Friedman vision of globalization brought into play, and I think it's been a disaster.
And what it did, of course, was allow commercial banks and investment banks to merge together with insurance companies and credit card companies and everything else, so that the money that you used to put into savings accounts that would be lent out for secure mortgages, for decent mortgages, would now become part of this gigantic global daisy chain of finance. And there were no firewalls, as we see, and you referenced Vietnam earlier. We're truly seeing the domino theory at work here. I mean, it's just one institution crashing into another, and with all these highfalutin, newfangled financial devices that allow a lot of crazy investing that you and I can't even begin to understand. And you're a pretty smart
it's
guy.
obvious now they can't understand it either.
Well, yeah.
It's just like Frankenstein, creating the monster. He has no idea what the monster's going to do, or Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, not knowing where the buckets of water are going to go. I mean, look, I think what's really, really clear from the point of view of, if you want to be a gambler, you can go to Las Vegas, you can go to Atlantic City, or you can go to Wall Street. And there's plenty of people who like it. It's sort of the same mentality, the same kind of, big swinging, what mentality that animates people to do all those things. And I think it's
no. You and I more or less agree here, but we're up against the perspective, the conventional wisdom that you have to be a responsible adult. You have to come in here now and make sure that these too big to fail institutions don't fail, because if they do, we'll have a credit crunch, which will lead to more unemployment, economic contraction, more foreclosures, and that the little guys and gals will be hurt too. And that's sort of, the adults in the room must take control. And if you raise the questions that you and I are raising, then we're considered to be reckless and archly ideological and not pragmatic. But the question I have now is, I see on both the Democratic and Republican side in the last day here some bubbles of resistance. Brad Sherman got 9. He's a Democrat on the Financial Services Committee. Is out with a letter getting Democrats to sign saying we're not going to go along with this. It should be $200 billion. If that shouldn't be, we don't have to do it within a week. And they have all these consumer protections and other provisions such as restraining CEO compensation. They want to attach to this as well. And I hear Republicans on the House Conservative Caucus saying, "Wait a second, why should we be using taxpayer dollars here to bail out these investors in Wall Street?" Do you think that there's enough of a left-right populist coalition here that can slow this thing down and cause problems for the Democratic leaders of the House and the Senate.
Well, I'll put it this way. I don't think that anything close to what Paulson proposed will pass. I think it will have a lot of features, that you're discussing. However, I would just emphasize that as much as I admire somebody for not voting for this particular piece of legislation, I will concede that the argument that we need to avoid a depression has some punch. Right. And if we were to let everything tumble, then in a domino effect, we might wind up in a depression. So let's not have that. But what I refuse to agree to do is to vote for something, or even a smaller version of the same thing, that I think will leave the same system intact. The issue is too big to fail. Right. And the way to deal with that is to compartmentalize. The way to deal with that is to federalize. And I mean, federalize in the old sense of federalism, as in it should not be the case that New York City is the financial capital of America. The whole premise of this country was based on the states and state power and states' rights, if you will, and state decision making. And one of the many geniuses of that system was compartmentalization and laboratories of democracy. I would love to see...
Of course, though, we do have in that system, you have the credit card companies all going to Delaware, insurances in Connecticut, and that has proven not to be all that effective in terms of regulation, transparency, and accountability.
I would seriously review corporate charters. I would say, listen, if you want to have limited liability, then you've got to prove to us that you're going to do something good with the huge advantage you're getting in limited liability. And the idea that Delaware incorporates just because they've figured out the racket of being a place where people go to file their papers and so on, I don't think that has any public policy legitimacy whatsoever. It's like an enterprise zone for companies.
But what you'd have to do is have a federal intervention, so to speak, to prevent that from happening.
I do it.
Well, that's sort of the opposite. And that's the opposite of federalism.
I would say, look, if you want to do business interstate.
The Interstate Commerce Clause, our favorite part of the Constitution.
But in the meantime, it's because the Interstate Commerce Clause has been used to roll over just about everything. Yeah. And it's important to go back and think about, take the Federal Reserve. Technically, the Federal Reserve is the Federal Reserve Board is 7 members who are geographically spread around the country.
As if that matters.
And it doesn't matter anymore, and that's the point, it should. And there are 12 regional banks, as if that matters. And it should.
Well,
we should go back to the idea that there are autonomous regions that have their own financial... places like Kansas City and, Dallas and so on used to be major financial centers for their regions, and now they've all pretty much moved to New York. They obviously have branches everywhere, but the headquarters and all these decisions, all these trillions in derivatives and swaps and stuff that are getting gambled and lost, are being lost in New York or London.
Well, this is where I think you and I part ways. I don't give a damn about the geography of this, and I don't know how you return powers to the non-New York members of the Federal Reserve.
What if you said you can't be an interstate bank? They have to have local banks.
Well, that so you could not get money from an ATM machine outside your state.
You could have an ATM relationship, but the point is, a bank can't own a bank in 2 states. What's wrong with that?
I'm not sure I'd have a problem with that.
Okay. That's good. That's what the founders had in mind. They said,
they certainly weren't thinking of ATM machines. They certainly weren't thinking of ATM machines.
I want ATM machines everywhere too, and I want to be accessible to them, but they don't have to all be the same company.
No, they don't.
They could be reciprocal.
No. So how do we break up the Bank of America at this stage in time?
I'm not sure, but it would pay us all, and to go back and look at the Glass-Steagall and what they did then.
Part of the problem is that, we're seeing a little bit of that now. What is it? Goldman Sachs and is it Lehman who now have to Morgan Stanley have to go back to being regular old banks.
But now they're going to get bigger. David, now they're going to get bigger.
Right.
Because they're going to start buying up banks. In other words, now that we're going to if AIG was too big to fail. Right. Then Goldman and Morgan are each going to be 10 times bigger than that. What are we going to do then?
Now, there's a big problem here for I see anybody, right of center, and that is, the whole notion that markets produce the best outcomes and are best left alone. I mean, what you're talking about here, Jim, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm sympathetic to this argument. Is having government imposed restrictions on commerce to keep things smaller, so that we don't get as intertwined, and to prevent these gigantic threats forming that can imperil the entire economy. So what we're really saying is that the market, left to its own devices, which seems to me to lead to greater gobbling up and concentrations of wealth and power, which is why people on the left have never liked it that much, has to be countervailing force. We're back to what Galbraith used to argue about, and it seems to me there should be a natural coalition here between conservative populists and liberal leftist populists who don't like the concentration of power, in corporate hands.
But let's be clear: the Galbraiths of the world, and I realize I'm speaking, broadly about a guy who wrote 30 books over a lifetime. His idea was the big institutions would be controlled from Washington. You have a giant corporation, you have a giant union, you have a giant whatever, and Washington would kind of control. My point is much different than what Galbraith, as I understand Galbraith, was talking about. It would be the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce would countervail each other in the corridors of Washington, and which is a very seductive idea to budding technocrats, because they know they never have to leave the Beltway to be on either side of that fight. And my point is much different. My point is you got to push the struggles respectively out to Idaho and North Dakota and Alaska and Alabama.
But then the problem is you run into the situation where standards get bid down. So you have Delaware that says, "Oh, wait a second, we'll make it easy. So everybody come here." You get rid of unions in the South and job safety provisions, so that people bring jobs down there. I mean, that's you have a race to the bottom.
You can still have national minimums. You can still have a Wagner Act. You can still have the Civil Rights Act. You can still do. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do those things. What I'm saying though is what I'm afraid is that what the left will be satisfied with saying, we are really stuck at the Goldman Sachs and Wall Street because we've created a new layer of regulation. Well, we had a new layer of regulation 6 years ago, which is Sarbanes-Oxley, and that was a big triumph for the Barney Franks of the world. And it, as far as I can tell, it did nothing. All it did was create billions and billions of more jobs for accountants and lawyers. The issue is not whether an accountant or a lawyer or a bureaucrat or a regulator are smart enough to figure out what's going on with these derivatives and swaps and whatnot. Because we know the answer already. They're not. And frankly, the people running them aren't smart enough to figure it out either. It's gambling. It's a casino. Now, the point is you'll never be able to regulate that stuff out of existence.
You can.
My point is you compartmentalize. No, but if the Titanic had this, we would still be floating.
But you can regulate certain industries. Insurance companies have to have X percentage of reserves to cover what their possible liabilities, right? I mean, you can create some.
I agree, you can do that. You can do that, but I still wouldn't let them get big.
Okay.
And I'm saying the thing is, I definitely think what we need to go back to. Is what everybody in this, and it's important to understand this was a completely bipartisan movement over the last 20, 30 years.
Oh, yes, the deregulation movement.
To have, but not just deregulation, but also the banking, sort of the finance stuff, that we would sort of systematically replace manufacturing and industry with finance. And I mean, every lobbyist in this town, and every think tank, frankly, it seems to me, is pretty much in the pocket of Wall Street and the financial globalization into things. And manufacturing seems sort of boring and stupid. That's why the reporters all miss the story.
Well, that's
that's
why we at Mother Jones went through McCain's list of lobbyists, 177, and found that 83 of them lobby for big finance.
Really?
Yeah, 83. These are people who are working for the McCain campaign, not people who just donated to him, but who are working.
Who are some of the names, just for fun?
Charles Black, and Rick Davis was in the news just the other day for being head of this group that was set up by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to avoid greater restrictions on them. So they can go to Mother Jones' site and see. We put up the whole list.
Yeah, I think we'll put the link up. I think this is very important. People understand.
So this is a good segue here, into the political end of this, because is there anybody out there who could actually make the case that that American corporations should be cut down to size and separated geographically as a way of winning votes. And what can both McCain and Obama do now other than sort of wring their hands and say, well, we're watching closely what's happening, and before giving our seal of approval. The interesting thing is they're both going to have to be there, or skip at least, the vote. Unlike some presidential candidates, they will have to vote on this package.
Right. I would just to correct the record here, I don't support doing this for all corporations. I don't think that General Motors or Google or Apple or Starbucks ought to be broken up into 50 different pieces. I think what I'm advocating is, and this is something that my colleagues here at the New America Foundation, Michael Lind and Cheryl Schweninger, have been talking about for years, and that is that we create banks for different purposes. Capital is like a utility. And if we need a bank that makes loans for mortgages, great. Have a bank that makes loans for mortgages. If you need a bank that makes loans for industry, do that. I mean, all the Asian countries are powered by banks that are pretty much oriented towards lending on behalf of factories and so on and so on. And if you want to have a bank that is completely, just casino gambling on derivatives and swaps and stuff, then fine, you can do that too. But you're just limited in size, and you're no claim on the federal treasury. If you want to make money and become a trillionaire, great. If you want to lose it all, that's fine too. We don't really care. You're kind of irrelevant to the productive economy. So just to be clear on that, I support decentralization of finance, not decentralization of all economics. Okay. But meanwhile, Obama and McCain, I think, are at least so as far as I can tell, both not really part of this debate very much. I mean, I think they're both figuring that they're better off to not saying very much. Right. Except the occasional statement like by McCain about firing Chris Cox or something, who I don't think had much to do with any of this problem. I mean, I'm not saying he was great. I just don't think he's particularly to blame.
No more than
anybody else at a senior position in both parties, in the Congress and across the regulatory agencies and the executive branch.
No, I think McCain should worry more about getting rid of Phil Gramm.
Who doesn't seem to go anywhere.
Doesn't seem to go anywhere. It still seems to be involved with the McCain camp in some form or another, and who has. We say everybody was responsible, but was it an animal farm? Some animals are more responsible than others, and Phil Gramm is certainly in that category of being more responsible than others. What's interested me in the past week is that I get the sense that John McCain is, although he and Barack Obama haven't come forward with their own plans and haven't been very specific driven here in response to the Paulson bailout, but it seems to me that John McCain is out populisting Barack Obama, at least in tone. I mean, you watch him on these speeches, and he gets angry. I'm angry at my friends. I'm angry. Look, I'm clenching my teeth. That shows you I'm angry. I'm angry, my friends, at those Wall Street players and their friends in Washington that help him. And he goes on, listen, I think we all should be damn angry. As I said earlier, 83 of those Washington lobbyists are helping his campaign, and I think it's sort of phony outrage on his part because he's always been more on the side of deregulation in the past and hasn't, cared much about these issues. But yet his tone is one of anger that I think people can, relate to, even if he's saying stupid stuff and is switching back and forth day to day. Bail out AIG, don't bail out AIG. The fundamentals are strong. The fundamentals are not what's important now. Whatever. The impression he gives is someone who's pissed off. Obama gets out there, and it's the old Adlai Stevenson business. He comes across as cool and cerebral, and he says what I think are more or less the right things, though he's not going as far as I'd like to see him say. But he doesn't seem to be having a gut reaction to the crisis at hand.
I agree. I think Chris Matthews on MSNBC asked some Obama press flag last week. Where's the passion in this guy?
Right.
Everything's a monotone. I look. This is a cliche of cliches for 2008. By any sort of reckoning of the political situation, the Republicans should be losing 3-1 at the presidential level. And the fact that it's still within a few points is a testament to the fact that McCain has some qualities that the American people like, and Obama has some qualities on net that they don't like. Obama's underperforming what should the Democratic percentage. To use a more serious number, I think a fair reading of the situation now would have the political climate something like 1932, where President Hoover was defeated by, like, I think 18 points.
Right.
And instead it's 1 or 2. I think Obama has a serious problem on this score. And I have to also say that having already put my cards on the table about what I think the reform should look like, the chances that a President Obama, as the 44th President of the United States, would turn to Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and the other Democratic barons and baronesses of the Congress and say, we're going to do it my way as opposed to your way, to me are about nil. I can remember Bill Clinton in 1992 in a similar situation, defeating the Republicans, getting elected with a big Democratic majorities in Congress, and said, "Now don't forget, Bill Clinton, got elected on the line item veto. We got to go do that." And Tom Foley and George Mitchell just looked at him and patted him on the head and said, "We'll worry about other things. We're not going to worry about that." And
well, God, Jim, the last thing I'm worrying about now is the relationship between Barack Obama and Harry Reid. Should Obama get elected?
Well, except that that's actually, I think, what the American people very much worry about.
I don't think that McCain will have an easier time of it.
No, but my point is the American people, in their wisdom, have decided to have a divided government for most of the last 60 years. I wrote a piece on this a while back.
And it hasn't really, I'm not sure it's gotten them a lot.
Well, no, but maybe not, but the point is what they want. They may find it preferable to one-party control.
I disagree. I think the vote for president is really a vote for the person. I think it's a psychological vote. I think people are voting for who they want to represent their idea of themselves in America. And I don't think they're making this strategic decision. Well, the Democrats will obviously have a 58-42 majority in the Senate, so I need a Republican to check them.
Then why has it been divided government for 19 out of 31 elections since 1946?
I think you make the argument that the Republicans have been very good in fielding strong presidential candidates.
Okay, and you can also make the argument the Democrats have been very good at fielding strong congressional candidates who are more attuned. I mean, it's a lot easier. There's a lot more.
My argument would be that over the course of these decades, the Democratic policy ideas, that you disagree with this, are closer to what people want, and so therefore they've had a natural advantage through most of that time period.
But the most ideological election is probably for president, and the Republicans have won 7 out of the last 10.
That's where I disagree with you. I don't think it's the most ideological election. I think a lot of people are not voting on ideology when it comes. I think people vote for senators and members of Congress more sort of from policy perspectives, if you want to call that ideology or not. But with the president, you're voting, I think, far more. Well, the people who make a difference, say the people who are in the middle third or the middle 20 or the middle 4%. Often it's more an impressionistic, psychologically driven decision. And I think one reason that Obama is underperforming what you would expect a Democrat to be doing at this point in time is indeed race. And if you look at this poll that came out a couple of days ago, I think it was very troubling for anybody who's interested in an Obama presidency. I don't have it in front of me, but the numbers were something like 30% of all white Democrats and independents agreed with at least one negative generalization about black people. Obviously fewer agreed with more than that. And it did show a fair amount of anti-black sentiment widely held amongst voting blocs that Obama has to do well in. And, how much that affects the decision any one voter has about any one candidate, is very hard to distill out. But it certainly is reason to believe that there is a Bradley effect, as people in the political world call it, that Obama is going to have to triumph over, and it may be that still, it may be a 3-point thing, maybe it's 8-point thing. I don't know if we can put a precise figure on it, and that's not to excuse what I think has been sort of an underperformance in the last few weeks on these issues. But it's a pretty big obstacle to overcome when you have white working class Democrats who are saying they're not sure about this guy.
So you agree that Obama should have picked Hillary?
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. I'm not sure that I would. I still don't know, and we'll find out maybe this election more than any other if a vice presidential pick matters.
Well, but when you also see polls, I agree with what you said, by the way. But when you also see polls that show that I forget, like 40% of Hillary voters are still undecided or planning to vote for McCain, it would suggest that Obama missed a chance to unite the party. And I speak as no particular fan of
I know that,
or Bill Clinton, but it would just seem to me that party mathematics would have told Obama you would have been better off picking.
Yeah, perhaps. The thing is, we never get to run a control experiment here to see if that would have been the case. Who knows what Bill Clinton might have said between then and now that would have made any pick of Hillary Clinton problematic.
Did you see? By the way, did you see the item that said that where Bill Clinton said that Hillary didn't want to be picked as vice president?
Of course not.
Yeah,
I believe that.
Annals of credible statements from politicians.
I believe that. But anyway, my point was that I think that McCain's been able to, fight Obama to a draw, if not better, just in terms of impressions in the last week and how he's reacting. And I think Obama's going to. And I know Obama, he's a black guy, and he's done very well as being a black politician who's not an angry black man. But he's going to have to find some way, I think, to forge a connection with people who are really upset, really frustrated, and don't understand why this is happening, what it means for them, and who have a tremendous amount of insecurity.
Which is why I was amused to see him meeting with Bob Rubin and Larry Summers and all the rest, and with Laura Tyson. I mean, all these people who are just Clinton leftovers. On the McCain side, you have Doug Holtz-Eakin, who was, chair of the Council of Economic Advisors for Bush, which is hardly going to be reassuring to most middle American voters. Right, and then,
they're both sort of stuck with their respective establishments.
Right, although then the difference becomes, I think you're quite right, is that McCain seems more upset about the situation and more willing to flail around. Again, I don't think Chris Cox is an appropriate fall guy here, and I don't think that Andrew Cuomo would be a very good SEC chairman. Not that there's any chance in the university to take it, by the way. I mean, he wants to be governor of New York or president or something. He doesn't want to go become a bureaucrat in Washington. But I thought George Will had a very apt column this morning in the Washington Post about McCain's temperament and what all this means, and if he's content to just simply replace sort of decisiveness as make that the main goal of his presidency in terms of being decisive and sort of contrarian. Who knows what in either party to expect from McCain presidency. It
does match his temperament, although it hasn't matched his policy over the years. But getting out there and giving the impression that he wants to knock heads together in Washington and Wall Street, is going to help politically.
Of course it will help politically. And by the way, and I do think, McCain does have a record that somewhat reflects, the usual suspect of issues, McCain-Feingold and, McCain-Lieberman and global warming and stuff. These are not issues, pieces of legislation I'm particularly in support of, to put it mildly. But they are examples of him reaching across the aisle in interesting ways. So, but
you're right. At this stage in the game, the party on the outs, with an attractive, charismatic candidate, should really be cleaning up. And I think we still have to see the Palin effect level off, which it will at some point. Water.
I think it already has.
It may have. It may get. The tables may even turn on her. I mean, today there's not that most voters care about this, but it may filter out there in one way or the other. Today, the mainstream media is in rebellion against the McCain campaign because they have refused to let anyone talk to her. But what they usually do is when, say, a candidate meets a world leader, you have a pool. You can't have the whole press corps there, but you have a television crew, a radio crew, and they share the footage that they get with everybody else. And there usually is one or two representatives of print media or a producer from one of the broadcast media who may ask one or two questions, not a full interview. And what the McCain campaign is doing, which is unprecedented, is saying you can send in the camera crews and the people with the microphones, but not anybody who will ask an impromptu question. So CBS News says, "No, wait a second, we don't participate then." And others are pulling off. And I think what's happening here is the McCain campaign is it really wants to keep her in a box as long as possible, and they are happy They are happy to have a fight with the media. Yesterday on a conference call, Steve Schmidt, sort of the top day-to-day strategist for the McCain camp, just started lighting into the New York Times, calling it an advocacy group in favor of Obama, 150% in the tank for Obama. Anything they say about McCain is wrong. It was all in response to a story that had come out about Rick Davis, the campaign manager for McCain, having worked for this group that was basically a lobby for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And not once did he point out one mistake in the piece. It was just he just started railing. And I think that, they're going back to the old Jesse Helms playbook. Get the base excited by running against the New York Times, the liberal Eastern elite media, and it also maybe will help them out if the New York Times has any bombshells to drop later in the campaign, when they can say, "See, we told you they were after us."
I agree that's what they're doing, and I also was waiting to see what was inaccurate about these stories about Rick Davis.
Nothing, apparently.
Okay, fair enough. Nothing. Okay, well that's
Davis was on the phone call too. He could have said, "I didn't do this, I didn't do that." They didn't deny a single thing.
Yeah.
He was just.
I do think that the McCain campaign is trying to sort of making a little experiment here. Can they run against a media like this? Is the mainstream media so fallen, so on its heels? That it can no longer have the kind of punch that it used to, and I think there's a lot of evidence for that. I think a lot of these investigative stories just haven't had the kind of impact that they would have had in elections past, when the New York Times and the Washington Post were more central to the debate in a way.
Well, that's certainly true with the development with all the with the internet and information technology.
I was interested to see in the Politico. I think it was Ben Smith had a piece. And Ben Smith is a young reporter. He speaks the Daily News and
he's
the New York Observer. Very smart, and had a piece. McCain camp criticism was rife with errors. I think that was the quote.
Yeah.
Rife, R-I-F-E, with errors. Which is a pretty tough statement.
No, but and he was right. He went through the 3 or 4.
He did go through it. I know. I'm not saying he's
wrong. He went through the 3 or 4 things that Steve Schmidt said that the mainstream media was not covering. Things that were critical about Obama. How Obama, started his political career in the house of Bill Ayers, by raising money. Well, the event there wasn't a fundraiser, and it wasn't the start of his political career. But whatever. And he went through these things, and then he, did what good reporters, do. He called the McCain camp to get a quote. And this person, I forget who he spoke to in the press office there, but it's in the piece. And the person said to him, "You know what? You're just quibbling with facts. The basic points are right." Woo!
Yeah, you actually talked to 2 of them. Yeah, I remember that. We'll post the link on this.
Quibbling with facts, says the McCain camp. Basic points are. It's like, this is what you say about your old uncle who rails about something and gets everything wrong, but you say, but he kind of knows what he's talking about.
Well, I mean,
it's a grumpy old man approach to the world.
Right. We'll see if it works. But I'm curious. Let's go back to the Palin thing for a second. I mean, in my memory of these things, the pool reporters were free to come into the event, and I think it was, in this case, it was Governor Palin shaking hands or meeting with President Karzai of Afghanistan. And they're free to shout out their questions. When did you stop beating your wife or beating your husband or whatever it might be? And the candidate is equally free just to ignore the question. Yeah,
they can ignore the question.
I'm a little puzzled over why they would not.
Because they don't want footage of her ignoring questions. All they want is footage of her looking vice presidential, sitting there talking to Henry Kissinger, or the president of Colombia, or Bono. Because she's apparently meeting with Bono too, and no one's saying, "Can you explain to us this? What's the capital of Colombia?" or anything, whatever they might shout. They just don't want that, so they've tried to shut it down. I mean, it's an interesting question. How long can they go before she actually sits down with the media? And are they playing a sort of risky game here by building up expectations of what may happen, or not letting her go and have a bad outing early on, and then have her have better outings as she gets closer to the election? What would you advise? You've been an advisor to candidates.
I have. I certainly think your candidate shouldn't answer questions if they're not ready. That's for sure. But I think that the downside of having your candidate getting yelled at, reporters, when they yell out questions, oftentimes look like jerks. Yep. And reporters kind of know that, and everybody kind of knows that, and so I don't think you lose much by ignoring a bunch of yammering people. Even if they have legitimate questions, and even if they're performing a legitimate First Amendment function, they still look bad and rude as they yell out. I think that they managed to turn the normal management of the press, which is to just ignore them when you feel like ignoring them, into its own independent story, which is the McCain campaign so obsessed with micromanaging press relations?
And he himself has gone over 30 days now, 35, 36 days, without holding a press conference. When you used to not be able to get away from him if you were a reporter. I remember him grabbing me in 2000 and saying, well, "What do you want to talk about, David?" Now his campaign doesn't return my calls, won't take my calls, won't take my questions on their conference calls, and he's not talking to me.
How do they do that? I'm sure viewers want to know this kind of stuff. How does the conference call work? Because the Steve Schmidt CNN question that led him to the question from the CNN reporter that led him to go off on the New York Times.
What happens is, they send out a press release saying we're having a conference call. You call in and you're on mute. While Steve Schmidt, Rick Davis, or whoever they have talking gives their initial spin or pitch, whatever they want to say, explaining an ad or a speech that's coming up, and then it usually is just a couple of minutes, and then they go, okay, we'll take some questions now. And and if you want a question, you press *1, and then and in this instance, this is not how Obama's people did it in the primaries when they were doing this. This instance, you're prompted to give your name and to say where you're from. So I say I'm David Korn from Mother Jones Magazine and Congressional Quarterly because I blog for CQ. And it obviously gets recorded, and then they start calling on people. And they say, okay, now Dana Bash from CNN. And they go through a list, and you don't know who else is on the call. And all you know is that, hey, they're not calling on me. Maybe I got my question late. I'll try earlier this time. Oh, they're still not calling on me. Maybe I'll try again. And after 10, conference calls later, you get the message. They're not going to take your call. And so Dana Bash of CNN asked about the Rick Davis story that appeared in the New York Times, and that just Rick Davis sort of made a joke. Oh, I'm so happy the New York Times is increasing my exposure, and they must have Davis envy. And then Steve Schmidt said, well, I have something to say about that. And he just lit into the New York Times, and as I described earlier. So those are how those conference calls go. So they do. So they
know exactly who they're going to get a question from.
So they seem to know who they're getting questions from, and they seem to vet. And they took calls from from Hugh Hewitt, and they take calls from some conservative bloggers. But I haven't been on a McCain call where I've heard anybody, you might say, from a left of center blog or or media outlet get a question.
So what would you ask if you could?
Well, I think this time I would have asked about the list of we put together, being parochial here, of 83 big finance lobbyists, and say, John McCain is out there on the stump decrying people who are lobbying for Wall Street as rigging the system and gaming the system. So would he therefore ask the people who do that, who work for his campaign, to stop doing that, or would he ask them to leave his campaign? If these people are part of the problem, how can he be working with them to become president?
If you were McCain and Obama, would you vote or would you not vote?
On this bill?
On this bill. I mean, would you physically take time off the campaign?
Well, the issue is, I think they want to have this vote on Friday. I have a hard time believing it's going to happen by Friday, and that is the day of the presidential debate, the first debate,
right,
which you and I haven't even talked about yet.
Right.
But I have to believe that the Senate leaders would put it off to the weekend, if they had to, so these guys could come back and vote on it, say, Saturday morning, since it's kind of members of each party here, the Republican senator and the Democratic senator. I think they're both. I don't think you can make that decision until you see what the bill actually is. I think if it's a bad bill, you can come. You have some guts. You come out and you vote against it. Now the the downside of that is, of course, is if between now and November 4th they don't put together a better bill for you to vote on, and the economy worsens in some way, and let's say the Dow falls, 5,000 points, and you're blamed for not having helped prevent that rolling collapse. Now, if you both vote the same way, then no one can be blamed any more than the other. So I think that it's almost like a three-dimensional chess problem here. You have to vote what you think is the right thing, as well as try to figure out what the other guy is going to do.
Right. If you vote and he doesn't, I mean, what if he says he's going to vote and at the last minute he doesn't show up or something like that, and you vote like a sucker,
right?
Right. I'm sure this is keeping.
No. Yeah. This is a $700 billion game of chicken. Is what you have between these two camps, and they're going to have feints and head fakes and all these things. Maybe they will actually encourage the leaders of Congress to schedule this debate for right in the middle of the presidential debate.
I couldn't possibly make it. I was committed to being here in Oxford, Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, and who knows? I mean, this could be where there's a back channel communication. I won't go to the Senate floor if you don't go.
Or I will. Yeah, who knows? I must say this is again the most exciting and twisting, turning election in my lifetime. That's for sure. And the thought that we have 4 debates coming up.
Wow, I know.
I mean, 3
and then we actually care about the vice presidential debate this time.
And the vice presidential debate is going to be the most entertaining of all, I mean, quite possibly. Between Palin as a phenomenon and Biden, just who knows what he'll say next. What Obama commercial he'll trash or whatever.
It's almost like reality TV. In fact, it is reality TV.
It is I've said that on Fox News Watch. I said look the news is the ultimate reality show.
Yeah.
I mean, by now these reality shows have gotten so staged and stilted that you kind of assume you're being gamed. But I mean, when they first came along, and I'm thinking about like MTV's Real World, like 15 years ago, people would actually say, "Oh, I think it's real. It's sort of spontaneous." I mean, even then, of course, they were all coached and
there was editing and all that stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. But now, I mean, by now, it's just become sort of a TV show without a scriptwriter. It just becomes, or without a formal scriptwriter, just the producer just telling people.
It's like an HBO. It's like an HBO miniseries. But final thing, because we probably should wrap it up. You have any brief thoughts about in previewing the debate to come on Friday night?
As I've said before, I think that Obama would have saved himself a world of grief, 2 months of difficult times for him, if he had agreed with McCain's proposal for the town halls next to each other, one a week for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah.
It was an idea from Newt Gingrich from a year ago or so, and I think it exactly is the cure for the overproduction and over-stylization of both the campaigns now, all teleprompters and stuff, and even the debates, which are kind of like overdone, over melodramas and so on. And they just stood up next to each other and said, "You ask a question, I'll ask a question, whatever." McCain was, and I think it was an eye opener to me that the McCain campaign felt more confident about their candidate, John McCain, than the Obama campaign felt about their candidate, Barack Obama. That McCain would make that offer and Obama would just jump on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with what you just said in terms of what it means about what they think about the candidates, but I agree with you. I mean, I think he should have taken the offer. I think it would have been obviously historic and would have set a great precedent, and we would have had, we still would have had a lot of mud and a lot of nastiness.
Right. But none of this Britney Spears stuff would have happened.
Yeah.
All the stuff which really has been damaging to Obama. The idea that he's an empty suit, the idea that he's someplace a celebrity who all he can do is give a speech. So now, having said that, the Obama campaign might have known what they're doing in terms of, I think most people agree that McCain did much better at the Brick Warren Saddleback Church events, and he was just crisper and tougher and tighter in his answers, and that means something in these things. So maybe the Obama people said, look, our candidate just isn't as good at this as McCain is, so we're not going to go into a format that disadvantages us, and that would seem to explain why they said no. But I think it opened them to the accusation that well, all the accusations that McCain's been making for 2 months now.
But I'll tell you this. I mean, having watched McCain at many town hall meetings this time around and back in 2000, he is very good when he's talking about about something that he cares about and knows about. I don't think there are a lot of things, though, he knows about and cares about. So on national security, when he doesn't start singing about bombing Iran, he comes across as a guy who sort of has strong views. He's not very deep. He will make his mistakes, confusing Sunni and Shia. But I think to most people he comes across as convincing. But I saw him do town hall meetings when someone would ask him a question about education, and he'd talk about it for literally 7 seconds and say, "Oh, my friend Joe Lieberman wants to talk about that now." And then Lieberman, who was next to him, would give a 2-minute answer. So I think how these things are structured and how the questions come will make a big difference in how McCain plays it. And if he, surprise, anything that throws him off his game may not be so good for him. But the first debate, as we know, is about national security, and what will be interesting to see if Obama tries to to what degree he tries and succeeds in bringing up these current issues of economic crisis into the mix, where he may have some advantages.
Right. No, I agree with that, and I think that there's lots of issues. I mean, I wrote a piece for Fox News, which I will provide a link for, in which I said McCain ought to get back to the issue of illegal immigration and border security. Mm-hmm. I think this is an issue that McCain has neglected on purpose because he's trying to cultivate a more centrist image. I think if I were he, I would simply say, we're going to build a wall, and unlike my opponent, no driver's license for illegal aliens. And I think McCain would go up 5 points in the polls if he did that. I'm not sure he will. He probably won't. But if he did, he would.
Well, there's some free advice from Jim Pinkerton, who was an advisor we should state to Mike Huckabee.
Right, from the McCain campaign's favorite proposal, Jim Pinkerton. Anyway, David.
Okay, well, I'm glad we're back together again.
We're back. Okay.
Reunited.
We'll talk after the debate.
After the debate. Take care. Bye, Jim.